Sawadee-kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're studying the words of the Buddha, and we're starting a new book. We're starting volume 13, which is titled Generosity. This is where you're going to learn about developing the mental quality of where you're practicing the action of generosity. What generosity is where you're giving and sharing your time, effort, energy, and resources more than is strictly required in any given situation without any expectation of anything in return. And it's important that whenever you're studying about generosity, that you understand the reason why it's being taught as part of the path to enlightenment. That if you understand the Four Noble Truths, that the cause of the problem is craving, desire, attachment, the wanting, the expectation, that this is what's causing the problem. The problem is the discontentedness, the conditioned feelings. Pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. This is how the unenlightened mind is forming its inner feelings on some condition. So that if it's sunny outside, the mind will be happy and excited. But then when it rains, the mind's sad or frustrated. Or when your bank account balance is a certain level, you'll be happy and excited. But then when it drops, you'll be sad or frustrated. And the mind's basing its inner feelings on some condition, expecting and wanting that to be permanent. But in reality, the mind lives in an impermanent world. So what you're doing with breathing mindfulness meditation is you're training the mind to let go, let go, let go. And you're also cultivating mindfulness or awareness of mind and concentration as well. But in that breathing mindfulness meditation, you're training the mind to let go. And you're doing the exact same thing when you're practicing generosity, is you're training the mind to let go. So that when you have craving, desire, attachment in your mind, you might notice that you're selfish, that you're holding on to things very tightly. My phone, my computer, my son, my daughter, my wife, my husband, my job, my money, my clothes, my jewelry, mine, 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 mine. This is what the unenlightened mind does when it has craving, desire, attachment. It looks to fulfill its own selfish desires, and it finds it very difficult to give and share without any expectation of anything in return. With the craving, desire, attachment in the mind, it's almost like an unquenchable thirst that the mind just wants more and more and more, and it wants things to be satisfying, self-satisfying, that the mind is chasing after its own selfishness, its own selfish desires. So when you're practicing generosity, you're training the mind to give and share without any expectation of anything in return. So when we were children, we learned to give and share. Like when we were playing with our toys, our parents would typically teach us to share. Or if we were eating, we might have been taught to share our candy or something like this. But as we age and we get away from mom and dad, our mind oftentimes becomes somewhat selfish, particularly when there's so much craving, desire, attachment in the mind. And also because we don't have the wisdom to understand why it is that we're sharing. That when we're children, we're just taught to share, and we don't necessarily know why. We just know that, okay, we should share, but we don't know why, that this craving, desire, attachment is causing our mind to experience discontentedness. And by sharing and practicing generosity, we train our mind to let go. We're living open-handedly. And then by doing that, it trains the mind to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. And you can move closer and closer to this peacefulness and joy that is the enlightened mental state. By the time you get to enlightenment, you're not going to be selfish. Even by the time you get to the first stage of enlightenment, you will have had to eliminate the selfishness and practice accomplishment and generosity, where you're giving and sharing without any expectation of anything in return, such as your time, effort, energy, and resources. So when you're going into a store and you hold the door for somebody, this is generosity. You're sharing your time, your effort, your energy, perhaps resources, more than is strictly required in any given situation. But you need to be careful that you're doing that without any expectation of anything in return. Because if you're standing there holding the door, expecting for a thank you, in some situations, people are going to say thank you. But because of impermanence, some people aren't going to say thank you. And if you're standing there wanting a thank you, now when somebody doesn't say thank you, you'll be frustrated, you'll be agitated, you'll be annoyed. So the way you protect your mind and be able to get to this true generosity, this pure generosity that's actually helping to enhance the quality of your mind, is you need to practice the giving and sharing without any expectation of anything in return, not even a simple thank you. So that when you're now practicing generosity, you're not doing it for any other reason than you know that it's enhancing the quality of your mind, that it's helping you eliminate craving, desire, attachment. How you choose to practice generosity, those are choices that you're going to make. How much generosity you're going to practice, that's choices that you're going to make. Whether you even practice generosity at all, those are choices that you're going to make. So when you're learning about generosity in the teachings of the Buddha, it's highly important to understand that he taught this because this is what leads to enlightenment. He didn't teach it to enrich himself because remember, he was a prince destined to become a king, and he had all the money and royal riches that you could imagine. But he left that life because he knew that it didn't lead to peacefulness and joy, and he went into this life of homelessness. And not that you need to be homeless in order to get to enlightenment, but that's the path that he chose. He chose to essentially be an ordained practitioner, was what we would refer to that person today, a monk or an ascetic. So the Buddha didn't the Buddha didn't teach generosity in order to enrich himself, that people should give him gifts. But instead, he needed to sustain his life. During his lifetime, he would accept food, he would accept clothing, he would accept shelter, and he would accept medical care. He wouldn't even accept currency. At the time, it was gold and silver. He wouldn't accept that. If somebody offered land, which was quite wealthy or even wealthy at all, any type of land, he wouldn't accept it. If they offered animals, he wouldn't accept it. Or during that time, there were slaves and certain women, right? He wouldn't accept these kinds of things. He would only accept food, clothing, shelter, and medical care. Those are the only things that he would accept. And of course, in that food is the drink, right? The water and something to hydrate the body. So by him being able to accept these offerings, his students were able to practice generosity. He was able to sustain his life. And there was this mutual support that was created where the students were supporting him by making these offerings, and he was supporting them by providing them teachings that would help them to improve their life. And this system continues in the world today. If you're making an offering to a temple or an ordained practitioner or a teacher, someone who's sharing the teachings of the Buddha, we refer to this as merit. So you're going to need to practice a certain amount of merit, but you're also going to need to be practicing generosity on a day-to-day basis with the people around you, not just ordained practitioners in temples and looking to continue the teachings of the Buddha, but with your life partner, your children, your neighbors, your boss, your coworkers. You're going to need to practice a certain amount of generosity. Even people you don't know, you're going to need to practice. And you're going to need to frequently practice generosity, because just like meditation, frequency is very important, that you do 2 or 3 meditations per day, building up to 30 minutes or more. If it was an option of 1 meditation for 30 minutes or 2 for 15, the 2 for the 15 are going to be more impactful than the 1 for 30. And the same thing is true with generosity. The frequency of your generosity is highly important. You're going to need to practice generosity on a daily basis in order to train the mind to let go. This is part of what's called the way of practice. There's 3 things that the Buddha taught that you would need to do on a daily basis in order to get to enlightenment. One is to practice generosity. The other one is to practice moral conduct, like right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And the third one is to practice meditation. So all of his teachings, whether it's the Eightfold Path or the 5 Precepts or any of the other things that he taught, when he was asked, essentially, what do you practice on a day-to-day basis in order to get to enlightenment? It's these 3 things. But of course, you need other things besides this in order to get to enlightenment. But generosity, the moral conduct, and meditation is so important because the generosity is training your mind to let go. The moral conduct is also training your mind to eliminate craving, because he teaches the moral conduct that you need in order to eliminate craving from your mind. And then the meditation is also helping you to eliminate the craving too. Of course, there's other things, but this is what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And you're going to need to find the middle way with your generosity. So what we're going to be studying in this book, the 13th volume, and this is the last volume of the entire book series. I've been teaching this program now for almost a year and a half, and we're going to be restarting the program in July. We're going to be studying these next 2 months, all the different chapters in the 13th volume titled Generosity. And when you're learning this, it's important that you understand that it's all about eliminating craving, desire, attachment in the mind, because you're going to see different things from the Buddha where he's teaching you about how generosity leads to rebirth in various realms. You're going to see that he talks about generosity leads to a certain amount of wealth or other things like this. And what he's teaching you is this cause and effect, or action and result, because everything in his teachings is all about helping you to understand the natural laws, namely the natural law of karma. So even this first chapter that I'll invite anybody who's in Zoom if you would like to read, but if nobody volunteers, I will read. Even this first chapter that we're going to be studying in volume 13, he's talking about practicing generosity and how it produces a wealthy existence in your next life, but also it can produce this heavenly rebirth as well. Whenever you see him teaching this, he's just showing you the cause and effect, or the action and result. He's not suggesting that it should be that you practice generosity in order to get these things. Because if you're practicing generosity in order to get something, it's not generosity. You haven't gotten to pure generosity yet because you still have an expectation in there. You need to practice generosity without any expectation of anything in return. So if there's anybody in Zoom that would like to volunteer to read this first chapter or any of the chapters, you can raise your hand electronically, open up your microphone and read. And for those of you guys in Facebook, YouTube, and Zoom, you can ask questions by putting it into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So Keely is offering to read this first one. Go ahead, Keely, if you'd like to read this first one. Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay. Giving. A here student, some man or woman gives food, drink, clothing, carriages, garlands, scents, omens, beds, dwelling, and lamps to ascetics or Brahmins, because of performing and undertaking such action. On the dissolution of the body, after death, he reappears in a happy destination, even in the heavenly world. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is wealthy.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So here, as I mentioned, the Buddha is sharing with us this cause and effect, this natural law of karma, helping you to be able to see that when you practice giving to ascetics and Brahmins, that this is going to be helpful for you. And you can see in his other teachings that it's helping you to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. But here he's just pointing out a specific aspect of generosity. And here in this book, you're going to gather a whole lot of information about what generosity leads to. But first, let's go through this chapter so you can see what the Buddha is talking about. During the lifetime of the Buddha, people would offer these various gifts, and others as well. They would offer food, drink, clothing, carriages, which are like vehicles to travel from one place to the other, like a horse-drawn carriage, a garland, which is like flowers, a scent, which was important during the lifetime of the Buddha because they only used to bathe about once a week, once every 2 weeks or something like this. So having a scent on the body would help so you're not having so much odor. Ointments is like medicine. Beds and dwellings, this is like a place to sleep because this ordained practitioners would sleep right in the home of their students. And then lamps were really important because they didn't have electricity during that time. So they would have oil lamps to be able to see where they're going. So these are certain gifts of generosity that people would practice. And they would practice other things too, but these are just kind of some of the main things that they would actually offer. And they would offer these to ascetics or Brahmins. And this was how they produced merit. But there's other generosity too, like doing things for your mom or your dad or your brothers or your sisters or somebody you don't even know that you encounter. This is also generosity as well, but this is referring to merit here. What an ascetic is this is what we would refer to as an ordained practitioner. This is someone who's given up worldly life and entered into a life of homelessness and is looking to get to enlightenment. And of course, you can get to enlightenment in the household life too, but oftentimes people were leaving the home in order to get to enlightenment because during the lifetime of the Buddha 2,500 years ago, living as a household practitioner was much more involved and much more time intensive than it is today. Today, we have modern conveniences like water and microwaves, and we can easily get food and clothing and all these kinds of things by just going to the store and purchasing them. But during the lifetime of the Buddha, just to get water in your house could be an all-day affair. To go down to the well, collect it up in buckets, bring it back to your house, dump it out, go back to the well, fill them back up, dump it out at your house. It could be a half a day or a full day just to get water to your house. And that water might only last for 2 or 3 days. And now you need to do that again. Where today we just walk over to a faucet, we turn a knob, and boom, we've got water in our house instantly. And household practitioners needed to cultivate their food. You know, they'd have to get seeds, they'd have to plant them, they'd have to water them, they'd have to take care of the plant, they'd have to harvest the plant, they'd have to bring the food in, they would have to cook it and clean it and do all those different things in order to prepare their food. So it was very time intensive. So one of the ways people would get to enlightenment is by leaving the household environment to go out into this life of homelessness, where they would give up worldly life, and now they would be learning with the Buddha to be able to get to enlightenment. Nowadays, we have so much time in our life as household practitioners, we oftentimes fill it up with unbeneficial things, whether it's countless hours of searching social media or searching YouTube or drugs and alcohol or things like this that an individual might choose to do in order to fill up and occupy their time. Whereas if you applied that time and effort to learning and practicing the teachings of the Buddha, for example, you could find that you can make quite a bit of progress on the path. So an ascetic is, for all intents and purposes today, somebody we would refer to as an ordained practitioner. What a Brahmin is somebody that we would probably refer to as a Hindu priest, that during the lifetime of the Buddha, there were certain people that were born into a certain caste system, and it was thought that if you were born into this family, that you were instantly a holy person. And now you would, the common people in the community would go to these Brahmin in order to perform rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship in order to create a better life for themselves. And this was a big misunderstanding that was going on during the lifetime of the Buddha, and it's also going on now too in certain communities, that people think that you can go to somebody, pay them some money perhaps, they perform some kind of ceremony for you, and now your life was supposed to get better. But this isn't the way that it works. You're going to need to gain wisdom and make wiser decisions, because everything you experience in life is based on the decisions that you make. And as you make decisions, that's going to produce a certain result. But because people didn't understand the natural law of karma and cause and effect during that lifetime, and there's many people who don't understand it nowadays, there's people who think you can go to somebody and they're going to instantly do some kind of thing for you and your life is going to become better. And this breeds a lot of corruption, because as you're paying money and you believe that these people are going to fix your life for you, you're actually not doing the thing that you truly need to do, which is cultivate wisdom. And these Brahmin, even though they were doing things like rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship, which isn't actually going to produce any kind of benefit in terms of somebody's life and cultivating wisdom, they still taught a certain amount of moral conduct. And people did practice generosity with them to a certain extent. So that's why the Buddha is including them here. And he's saying, okay, if you practice generosity with a ordained practitioner or a Hindu priest, he's saying, okay, because of doing that, after death, you could potentially be reborn in this heavenly world. It's not anything mystical or magical that this is occurring, and this isn't the ultimate goal of the teachings of the Buddha. His teachings aren't about a bunch of beliefs, and you believe a bunch of things, and then you hope something good happens when you die. Instead, what is happening is when you're practicing generosity, it's eliminating craving, desire, attachment in your mind, and you're getting closer and closer to enlightenment. But if you fall short of enlightenment for any reason, the same things that lead to enlightenment are the same things that lead to a rebirth in the heavenly world. So in this situation where somebody is being reborn, they haven't gotten to enlightenment, if they've been practicing a fair amount of generosity, they would have less and less and less craving in their mind, with more and more ability to potentially be reborn into the heavenly world. Or they might even be reborn into the human world. And that's what the Buddha is showing the cause and effect here too, that a person could potentially be reborn into the human world, and in that situation, they're going to be wealthy. This is the cause and effect that is occurring. Because of whatever you put out, this is what's going to come back to you. So if you're practicing generosity and you're giving and sharing with the people around you, the people around you are going to be willing to give and share with you as well, and maybe give you jobs and help you to sustain your life. And this is where the wealth is actually coming from. But you need to be sure that if you're practicing generosity, that you're not doing it for these reasons. Because if you're doing it for these reasons, then it's not generosity. There's still an expectation. There's something that you're wanting there. So the Buddha is not teaching you this because this is what you should want and you should practice generosity in order to get these things. Instead, he's teaching you this because he's showing you the cause and effect, that if you practice generosity, it's helping you to eliminate craving, desire, attachment, which ultimately leads to certain benefits. Because as you're practicing generosity and you're noticing certain benefits in your life, you can attribute that to the rightful thing that you're doing so that you can actually see the cause and effect. And here in a little bit, you're going to see some other chapters where he's talking about the benefits of generosity in a much more detailed way than just here. This is the first chapter, just kind of opening up with very general, very simple teaching. But now as we go through the remaining chapters for today, you're going to see a lot more detail around generosity and some of the benefits. And we've got, I think there's 84 chapters in this book, or maybe 89 chapters, I think, in this book. So you're going to learn a lot about generosity. And while this is the 13th book of the book series, somebody might think that maybe because it's the 13th book that it's less important. But in reality, this is one of the most important things that you could be practicing in your journey to enlightenment. It's the 13th book because it's important to understand the cycle of rebirth and other things like this before you get to generosity, because you would need to have a little bit of understanding of the cycle of rebirth, which is volume 11, in order to understand some of the teachings here in generosity. It's also important to put this generosity as the 13th book, because if it was the very first book, which it very well could be in this book series, because generosity is that important, perhaps a student might think, oh, well, maybe this teacher is just trying to get money from me or try to get me to practice generosity. When in reality, a teacher shouldn't want anything from their students. They shouldn't have any expectation at all. They're practicing generosity with their students, and their students might choose to practice generosity with them. So even though it's the 13th book, don't think that generosity is somehow less important than meditation or any of these other things that you've been learning. This is such an important mental quality. I can't emphasize it enough that how important it is to practice generosity. Without generosity, you wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment. Without generosity, you wouldn't even be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment. You're going to need to have generosity as part of your practice. So let me know what questions you guys have here on the first chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. All right, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere, so I'm going to move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 2. And remember, for all of you guys in Zoom, you're welcome to read at any time. Just raise your hand and let me know. This second chapter is titled, What is Accomplishment in Generosity? Oh, there's Keely. Go ahead, ma'am.
What is accomplishment in generosity? And what is accomplishment in generosity? Here, a noble disciple resides at home with a mind free from the stain of selfishness, freely generous, open-handed, joyful in letting go, devoted to charity, joyful in giving and sharing. This is called accomplishment in generosity.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So this is a teaching that you need to know in order to get to the first stage of enlightenment. You can see in the Teachings of the Buddha back in volume 5, which is all about the first stage of enlightenment, where the Buddha teaches that in order to get to the first stage of enlightenment, you would need to be practicing and have attained accomplishment in generosity. Here, what he's talking about is a noble disciple. What a noble disciple is somebody who's practicing his teachings very deeply. He would refer to them as a noble disciple. And the reason why is that during his lifetime, people were born into different families and there was a caste system. And if you were born into an affluent or a noble family, it was considered that you were going to have this great, wonderful life. And these noble people would walk around the community with their right shoulder exposed. So they would wear clothing, but their right shoulder was bare. And this identified them as being noble or affluent. So when you're walking around town, you would know, oh, that's a noble. Or, oh, this is someone who's impoverished and in poverty, right? You could see that very clearly by the clothes that they were wearing. So oftentimes people thought if you were born into a rich, wealthy, affluent family, you were destined to a wonderful life and you were a great person. And if you were born into an impoverished family, that you were destined for, a life of difficulties and struggles. So the Buddha came and kind of flipped this upside down on its head. And he was saying, hey, it's not about where you're born. That's not what determines whether you're a noble person or not. What determines whether you're noble, whether you're, doing wonderful things in the world, is whether you have wisdom. What are you practicing? What is the wisdom in your mind? How polluted is your mind? How are you practicing? This is what determines whether you're noble, is your actions. So even if you were in a impoverished family, if you became a student of the Buddha, you would wear a robe and expose your right shoulder, and you are now noble. The Buddha considered that anybody who was studying these teachings, they're deeply working to get to enlightenment, they're cultivating wisdom, they're training their mind, and now this is a noble disciple, someone who's practicing the teachings closely. So what he's saying here is anybody who's practicing the teachings closely, they reside at home with a mind free from the stain of selfishness. As long as you have that stain of selfishness in there, there's craving, there's desire, that the mind's wanting things to be satisfying and self-pleasing, that you're not interested in giving and sharing. So you're going to need to eliminate this selfishness. But if you're practicing the teachings closely, your mind is free from the stain of selfishness. You're freely generous. You're sharing things with other people. You're living open-handedly, meaning you're not holding on to things tightly with your fist. You're living open-handedly. You're willing to give and share. And you're joyful in that letting go, that there's joy that springs up in the mind. If you've ever donated to like an orphanage or a women's abuse shelter or some other place like this, as you're donating, perhaps you felt joyful in that, right? Or maybe if you've made donations to a temple or to a teacher, maybe you feel joyful in letting go. And you're devoted to charity, interested in helping other people, that you're not just, out there fulfilling your own selfish desires, that you experience this joyfulness in giving and sharing with others. And this is what you're going to need to cultivate. Whereas if you have selfishness in your mind, there's greediness in there, even just a little bit, the mind's not going to be practicing accomplishment and generosity. And you would need this in order to get to the first stage of enlightenment. Any questions here? Remember, you can put it into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or in Zoom, you can raise your hand electronically. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So I'm going to move on to chapter 3. This is a section of the book that's titled The Purpose of Giving. Okay, so here we're going to see some benefits of giving. This is chapter 3. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands yet, so here we go. Keely, you're welcome to read all of them if you like, Keely.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
A directly visible fruit of giving related to future lives. Is it possible, Wonderful Sir, to point out a directly visible fruit of giving? It is Siha. A donor, Siha, a generous giver, is dear and agreeable to many people. This is a directly visible fruit of giving. Again, wholesome persons go in large numbers to a donor, a generous giver. This, too, is a directly visible fruit of giving. Again, a donor, a generous...
You already read number 2, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, wholesome...
I think you read number 2 already, right?
Yeah.
So you're...
Because my stream is keep scrolling, so I didn't see it clearly. Okay. Again, a donor, a generous giver, acquires a wholesome reputation. This too is a directly visible fruit of giving. Again, whatever assembly a donor, a generous giver, approaches, whether are Khatiyas, Brahmins, householders, or ascetics, he approaches it confidently and composed. This too is a directly visible fruit of giving. Again, with the breakup of the body, after death, a donor, a generous giver, is reborn in a good destination, in a heavenly world. This is a fruit of giving related to future lives.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So here, a student is asking the Buddha, is it possible to share what is the benefit of giving, right? Because people were asking him, like, you're teaching us to practice generosity. What's the benefit of that? So this is just one discourse. The Buddha has other discourses multiple discourses where he's teaching the various benefits. This is just one of many. So here, this isn't an all-inclusive list of all the benefits of giving, but this is just one discourse on that. So here, the first one, the Buddha is saying a donor or a giver, somebody who practices generosity, is dear and agreeable to many people, which essentially means that you have many friends, right? This isn't the reason why you should practice generosity to get many friends, but as you do practice generosity, you're going to see that you produce more and more friends. This is the cause and effect that the Buddha is helping you to be able to see. I've had people come to the temple the very first time, they've never even learned from me, and I see that they're very generous in helping people at the temple and handing out water and cleaning and doing different things. And I say to them, I say, I bet you have many friends, don't you? They're like, yep, I sure do. And I can tell because they're so generous. And this is the cause and effect. And you can understand why people have a lot of friends. Again, if you had practiced generosity with the expectation to get friends, it's not going to work because there's still craving, desire, attachment in there. But if you practice generosity without expectation, this is pure generosity. And this is one of the benefits that it's going to produce. Also, the Buddha is saying wholesome persons go in large numbers to you. This is like people who are into wholesome things, right? Like friends and co-workers and people like this that are into wholesome things. That's what he's sharing here. Then he says you acquire a wholesome reputation. So if you're giving and sharing at your workplace or with your neighbors or people like this, it's going to produce a wholesome reputation. One of the things that I've learned about recently, even though I've been teaching for many years in Chiang Mai, is some different students have been coming and they said, hey, David, these people over here sent me to you. They said you're a really great teacher and blah, 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 blah. They're saying all these, different things about me. And it's like, I don't even know who these people are, but somehow the word has spread because I'm practicing generosity to share these teachings with others. And now there's this wholesome reputation in the community of Chiang Mai about this individual who's sharing teachings in Chiang Mai. And you'll notice this, like I mentioned, if you start sharing at your workplace, you're going out to lunch, maybe you're buying yourself some bagels or a certain drink or certain donuts or something like that. You bring some back for other workers in your office. You're going to notice that you have a wholesome reputation. Not the first time you do it, but over time, there's this cause and effect, right? And again, you would need to practice generosity without the expectation of this. But the Buddha is just helping you to be able to see so that as you practice generosity, in order to enhance the quality of your mind, when you see these things occurring, you'll know what the cause and effect is of these things and the reason why. Then he says, whatever assembly a donor, a generous giver approaches, whether Khattiyas, Brahmins, householders, or ascetics, he approaches it confidently and composed. So Khattiyas was a population of people during the lifetime of the Buddha that were practicing these teachings very well, even before the Buddha started teaching them, because these are the natural laws of existence and different populations of people can kind of tap into these natural laws and learn them at different times. So the Buddha would oftentimes hold up the Khattiyas as individuals who were practicing the teachings very closely. Today, if somebody asked me, I would say, that's the Thai people here in Thailand, particularly here in Chiang Mai. These people are practicing the teachings very closely. Brahmins are people who are into holy things and practicing, good moral conduct. Householders or practitioners who are learning the teachings of the Buddha and practicing a certain level of moral conduct. Ascetics are ordained practitioners. Well, if you're into unwholesome things and you're doing unwise things, when you approach people who are into wholesome things, you might kind of feel like less of a person. You might feel like diminished because in the back of your mind, you know that you're doing unwise and unwholesome things. So when you approach people who are practicing wholesomeness, you will lack confidence and your mind might be shaken up and uncalm because you see yourself as being below these people. But if you're practicing giving and sharing and you're practicing to eliminate craving, desire, attachment, and all these other wholesome teachings, what the Buddha is saying is when you approach wholesome people, you'll be confident and you'll be composed. Your mind will be calm because you're not feeling shaken up. You're not feeling less of a person because you know that, okay, these are wholesome people, but I'm doing wholesome things too. So I can be confident and I can be composed when I'm around these individuals. And then this last one here, he's talking about, yes, if you are a generous person and you die, you haven't gotten to enlightenment yet, there's this potential to be reborn into the heavenly world. But remember, this isn't the goal of the teachings of the Buddha, and being reborn in the heavenly world is not the ideal existence. In the heavenly realm, these beings are experiencing exclusively pleasant feelings. They have the opportunity to get to enlightenment, but they oftentimes are complacent and they don't learn and practice, so they oftentimes are reborn into other realms. Now, as you hear me say, there's nothing in the teachings of the Buddha that is to be believed. The cycle of rebirth can be independently verified. You might not have the wisdom of how to do that right now, but it is something that you can cultivate over time, and you can independently verify that the cycle of rebirth is true. And one of the things that you will come to understand is that these realms that we talk about, they're not in some far distant land, in some, place really far away. Sometimes we envision hell being deep down in the core of the earth, or heaven being way up in the sky somewhere. But all beings are in the same time and space. So just like I'm sitting in this chair now as a human being, it would be very possible for when I get up and leave for an animal to come sit in this particular chair. Maybe a gecko. We have geckos running around the house, not our pets, but they're just, little geckos, or we call them jingjokes, right? They kind of like run around the house. They come in through the cracks of the doors and things like this. Very easy for one of them to come and sit in this chair. So just like animals and humans are in the same time and space, the same thing is true for hell beings, for afflicted spirit beings, and heavenly beings. Even though they're formless beings and not everybody can see them, even though some people can, you will come to understand that they're right here in the same time and space. Because if you have the ability to see these beings or communicate with these beings, you'll know that they're in the same time and space as us. So with the breakup of this human body, if you've been practicing generosity, there's less craving, desire, attachment in the mind. And because of that, you can be reborn into a destination like the heavenly world. But understand that that's not the goal. The goal is to get to enlightenment in this life, and that the heavenly world is not an ideal existence. So let me know if you have any questions on this chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. All right, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So we'll move to the next chapter. And Keely, I see you opened up your mic. I'm just going to kind of talk about this one briefly because it's very similar to the last one. And then I think the next one or two, I'll have you read that one. Here, this is essentially very similar to the last one. This is where you can see the Buddha teaches multiple times the benefits of giving, that it's not just one discourse. So sometimes you'll need to read 2 or 3 or 4 discourses to put together all the benefits of a particular thing, because he's not listing them all in one discourse. So here, very similar to the last discourse, he's saying that the benefit of giving is that you're dear and agreeable to many people, that there's wholesome persons that go in large numbers. This is just like he said last time. One acquires a wholesome reputation. This is also like he said last time. This is a new one that wasn't in the last one, where he says one is not deficient in householder duties. What he means by this is, like, if you're practicing generosity and you're practicing wholesome, qualities of mind, that you're also going to be practicing wholesomeness in your home, that you're probably going to be cooking or cleaning or vacuuming or doing things around the house, that you're going to be taking care of the householder duties, meaning the duties that it takes to maintain your house. Whereas if you're not practicing generosity, you might be really complacent and you might have kind of like a dirty home, or different things like this. You might not be taking care of your home. But if you're taking care of other people by practicing generosity, then you're also going to be taking care of your own home too. And then this 5th one is the same thing that he taught in the last discourse, which is that with the breakup of the body, one can be reborn in the heavenly world. And then he adds some things down here where he shares, essentially that by giving, that you're going to be around people who are practicing the teachings very closely, that the wholesome, mentally disciplined monks always go in large numbers to one, because us teachers, we're going to need support from the students. We wouldn't be able to share the teachings if we didn't have support from our students. And there's this mutual support that's created from the lifetime of the Buddha. So we don't share these teachings because we want your support, but we do need support from our students in order to be able to practice these, or to be able to share these teachings. An individual who should be sharing these teachings would be doing so with loving kindness and compassion, where loving kindness is a genuine interest in seeing all beings be well active goodwill. Compassion is the concern for the misfortune of others. Those should be the primary reasons why you're actually sharing the teachings as a teacher. But then, because you've given up worldly life and you've entered this life of homelessness, or you've entered into a life where you're fully dedicated to sharing the teachings with others, you're going to need some kind of support. And you can use some of that support to provide for your basic necessities to sustain your life. But then you would be sharing some of those things with your community too. You should have a nice place to teach your students with meditation mats and clean environments and various things to be able to help your students to be able to then learn the teachings very easily. So during the lifetime of the Buddha, of course, people would teach in homes and teach in villages, and we still do that nowadays. But what he's sharing is that, when you're making offerings and you're practicing generosity, these people who are practicing the teachings very closely and have deep wisdom, they're going to be around you because you're practicing generosity with them. And where this benefits you is that you get to learn the wisdom that it takes to be able to eliminate discontentedness. This is the problem in the unenlightened mind, in that this will help you get closer and closer to enlightenment. So by you practicing generosity with teachers, particularly you'll see as we go through this book that the Buddha shares with you about practicing with the 8 types of persons. You're going to learn about this as we go deeper into this book. Not today, it's not in the chapters that we're studying today, but later in the book, you're going to learn about these 8 people that the Buddha teaches you to share offerings with. But you're also going to need to practice generosity with other people too. But in terms of this particular benefit is that you're coming in contact with people who have a deep amount of wisdom about the teachings, that it's going to help you to then learn that wisdom to then be able to get closer to enlightenment yourself. So let me know if you guys have any questions on this one. We didn't actually read it, but you can read it. It's chapter 4 in volume 12. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So now let's go to the next one, which I think, we can read this one. Go ahead, Keely.
Okay. A donor who gives food gives life, beauty, peacefulness, and strength. Monks, when a donor gives food, he gives the recipients 4 things. What for? He gives life, beauty, peacefulness, and strength. 1. Having given life, he takes part in life, whether heavenly or human. 2. Having given beauty, he takes part in beauty, whether heavenly or human. 3. Having given peacefulness, he takes part in peacefulness, whether heavenly or human. 4. Having given strength, he takes part in strength, whether heavenly or human. Monks, a noble disciple who gives food gives the recipients these 4 things. One who respectfully gives tiny food to those mentally disciplined ones who eat what others give, provides them with 4 things: life, beauty, peacefulness, and strength. The man who gives life and beauty, who gives peacefulness and strength, will attain long life and fame wherever he is reborn. Monks, a donor who gives food gives the recipients 5 things. What 5? One gives life, beauty, peacefulness, strength, and discernment. 1. Having given life, one takes part in life, whether heavenly or human. 2. Having given beauty, one takes part in beauty, whether heavenly or human. 3. Having given peacefulness, one takes part in peacefulness, whether heavenly or human. 4. Having given strength, one takes part in strength, whether heavenly or human. 5. Having given discernment, one takes part in discernment, whether heavenly or human. A donor who gives food gives the recipients these 5 things. The wise one is a giver of life, strength, beauty, and discernment. The intelligent one is a donor of peacefulness and in turn acquires peacefulness. Having given life, strength, beauty, peacefulness, and discernment, one is long-lived and famous wherever one is reborn.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So these are some more benefits of having given a donation of food. And the Buddha is saying, okay, if you give food, these are the 4 things and these are the 5 things. These are 2 different discourses where he's kind of giving the benefits, or he is giving the benefits of what you experience, because you are giving life, beauty, peacefulness, strength, and then ultimately discernment. These are the things that you're experiencing that's coming back to you. He's teaching you the cause and effect. He's not telling you that you should be attached to these things or you should expect or want these things. He's just showing you this cause and effect. And it's helpful for you because that's what you're awakening to. When we talk about awakening to enlightenment, or you're awakening to the wisdom, or you're cultivating wisdom, when we talk about this on the path to enlightenment, what we're talking about is being able to see the truth of this cause and effect, or this natural law of Gama, or some people might say karma. So by him teaching you this, you'll know that when you go out into the world and you're practicing generosity to enhance the quality of your mind, and you start seeing these benefits that are being experienced, then you will know that the reason why this is occurring is because of your generosity. And then you'll be able to see the truth for yourself of this cause and effect. So let me know if you guys have any questions on this chapter. Looks like Junko has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. So here, the beauty, the word of beauty. So I wonder what kind of beauty refers here.
Mm-hmm.
For example, so if you're so the beauty, like this stuff, or I'm sorry. My question is, what is the beauty here?
Sure. If you've ever been really hungry, or you've ever seen somebody who's been really hungry, you might see like irritability in their face and look very grumpy and very irritable. And someone might even say ugly, right? But if you're giving food to somebody and they're able to eat, what the Buddha is saying is you're giving beauty. Because, obviously if somebody's grumpy and irritable in the mind, this is because of craving, desire, attachment, but that does tend to take an effect on your appearance too. But if you're well fed, then you're experiencing this beauty because you're well fed. So the Buddha is saying, okay, by you giving food, you're giving beauty. And this is how one is now able to experience the cause and effect. And he's saying, okay, once you're reborn, this is the result of what you would experience in either a heavenly existence or a human existence. Your appearance will be beautiful because that's what you're giving. And again, this isn't something you should expect or you should want, but he's just showing this cause and effect relationship.
Okay, so the beauty here is like what we can see now. So, for example, the people who really she's beauty and he's beauty are beautiful. So it's kind of same meaning. So through the eyes, so we can see the beautiful stuff like the scenery or the way of life, for example, and also what else? Anyway, something and then the flower. So a lot of beautiful stuff in the world. So like that. So the like appearance. So
what he's talking about here, Junko, is that if you are reborn, then physically you will be beautiful yourself. That's what he's talking about. And here's one of the reasons why this is helpful, right? Sometimes we're born into this world and we look in the mirror and we think that we ourselves are ugly, or we might think that we ourselves are beautiful. And you might ask yourself, why? Why is this person beautiful and this person is maybe not so beautiful? I think everybody's beautiful, but you might look at people and you might think that one person's beautiful and one person's not. So the Buddha is explaining to you why that is, that if you're born into this life and you were beautiful, this is because of generosity that you practiced in your previous life. And this can be really helpful for you and can relieve your mind of like, oh, okay, I understand now why I am beautiful or why other people are beautiful or why one person might not be considered beautiful. It's because of not practicing generosity in a previous life.
Okay, I see. So the beauty is coming from the inside. So it's not the appearance. So he or she look beautiful, but it's coming from what she done or he did so far.
The beauty that the Buddha is talking about here is outside beauty, the physical beauty, but you are accurate that beauty is coming from inside. Because if you have a lot of craving in your mind, you're going to be grumpy and irritable and agitated and annoyed and frustrated, and that's going to show up in your appearance. But if you're eliminating your craving, desire, attachment by practicing generosity in this life or a previous life, now because you have less craving, your appearance is going to be more beautiful.
Yeah, I see. Okay, so that meaning the beauty here. Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let me check, see if we have any more questions anywhere. Okay, I don't see any anywhere. All right, so I'm going to move to the next chapter, which this is chapter 6. All right, so Keely, if you would like to read, you're more than welcome.
Okay. A donor who gives medicine gives beauty, peacefulness, and strength. Brahmin, there are these 10 advantages from koji. Rice porridge that is very nutritious that serves the purpose of medicine. What 10? In giving kanji, one gives life, one gives beauty, one gives ease, one gives strength, one gives intelligence. Kanji, when it is drunk, checks hunger, keeps off thirst, regulates wind, cleanses the bladder, digests raw remnants of food. These Brahmins are the 10 advantages of kanji. To the discerning who gives kanji duly at the right time to one who lives on others' food, it confers 10 things on him: life and beauty, ease and strength. For him, intelligence arises from it. It dispels hunger, thirst, and wind. It cleanses the bladder. It digests food. This medicine is praised by the wayfarer. Therefore, kanji should be given constantly by a man interested for ease, by those aspiring to become heavenly beings like Joyce, or acquiring human prosperity.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So this kanji, if you've ever eaten Chinese food, this is an actual thing that I've eaten as part of Chinese cuisine, and it looks like they had it in the region of the world that the Buddha was in as well. It's kind of like a rice porridge. Here in Thailand, we call it jok, or there's also something called katom, but this is more like jok if you're familiar with Thai food. In Chinese culture, it's called congee, and that's what I know it as. So this was eaten.
In Chinese culture, it's also called zhou.
Oh, okay. I've eaten it at Chinese restaurants. They call it congee sometimes when I was living in America. So maybe some places call it congee, some people call it jok, different places like this. So this is a food that is very nutritious for the body, and it was used almost like medicine during the lifetime of the Buddha. And he's giving these different benefits that one experiences by eating congee. And then he's explaining to you the benefits of giving this. And he's saying here that it should be given constantly, right? So basically frequently, like I was explaining to you, that the frequency of giving is so important to be able to do that. I think all of this is pretty self-explanatory, but you might have questions about regulates wind, what he's talking about here. What he's talking about here is that the human body was described through the four element theory during the lifetime of the Buddha. And even now today here in Thailand in traditional Thai medicine, they talk about the earth element, the water element, the wind element, and the fire element. And this is how they describe the body. The earth element is the solids of the body. The water element are the fluids of the body, like the tears, saliva, urine, things like that. The solids are things like your teeth, your fingernails, your hair, your bones, things like this. Then the wind, this is the movement. So like the blood is the water element, but the movement of the blood in the vein is the wind element. Or the feces is the earth element, but of course sometimes there's water elements in there too if you have diarrhea. But the movement of that through the colon is the wind element. And then you've got the fire element, which is attributed to digestion. And they would basically diagnose the body and treat the body with medicinal herbs through diagnosing with this four element theory. So what the Buddha is saying is that this kanji regulates wind, because in order to be healthy in this traditional theory, you need to have all your four elements balanced. Whereas if you have an excess of a certain element or a depletion of a certain element, there's going to be sickness in the body. But if you have all these elements balanced, then the body is going to be healthy. So if you're regulating wind, it means you're bringing it to a balance, right? So the movement of feces through the body, for example, can be balanced out with this kanji, right? So that's what he's describing here. But I think all these other things are pretty straightforward. But if you guys have questions on them, let me know. You can ask all that you like through Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. All right, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So we will, by the way, this is the details that you'll get if you read. So you've got, the words of the Buddha, you've got the reference of where this comes from, and then you've got reflections from me to be able to help you understand some of the things that I just talked about. But you can get all the full details in the book itself. And you can get these from our website by downloading them for free. You can take it and go print it. You can get printed versions here at the temple in Chiang Mai just by reimbursing us for the printing cost, or you can order them on Amazon if you like. So this is chapter 7. If you'd like to go ahead, Keely, you can read this one.
Okay. The giver of the agreeable gains the agreeable. The giver of the agreeable gains the agreeable when he gives willingly to the upright one's clothing, bedding, food, and drink, and various kinds of supplies. Having known the arahants to be like a field for what is relinquished and offered, not held back, the wholesome person gives what is hard to give. The giver of agreeable things gains what is agreeable. The giver of the agreeable gains the agreeable. The giver of the foremost again gains the foremost. The giver of the excellent gains the excellent. The giver of the best reaches the best state. The person who gives the best, the giver of the foremost, the giver of the excellent, is long-lived and famous wherever he is reborn.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So here, the Buddha is again talking about some of the benefits. Here, he's talking about having known the arahants, meaning known the enlightened beings, to be this, essentially place where you're going to be making offerings to enlightened beings. He's saying, okay, this is being very helpful for you because you're giving agreeable things that are going to be helping people to be able to get to enlightenment. These are benefits that are coming to you as well. Because as you're practicing and making offerings, if you were making offerings to an enlightened being, you're coming in contact with someone who's got a deep amount of wisdom to be able to help you get to enlightenment. And that's the ultimate benefit. It's not a mystical or magical thing, like if you make an offering to an enlightened being, that magically something beneficial is going to happen for you. Instead, it's that you're coming in contact with somebody that has deep amount of wisdom to be able to help you get to enlightenment. So making an offering to an arahant would be very beneficial, or making an offering to an enlightened being would be very beneficial for you. So the Buddha is just kind of detailing that here. So let me know if you guys have any questions on this chapter. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So now we'll move on to chapter 8. All right, Keely, you're up.
Okay. The way leading to wealth. Malika, and still some woman, is not prone to anger or often exasperated. Even if she is criticized a lot, she does not lose her temper and become irritated, hostile, and stubborn. She does not display anger, hatred, and bitterness. And she gives things to ascetics or Brahmins, food and drink, clothing and vehicles, garlands, scents or ornaments, bedding, dwellings, and lighting. When she passes away from that state, if she comes back to this world, wherever she is reborn, she is beautiful, attractive, and graceful, possessing supreme beauty of complexion, rich with great wealth and property, and influential. This is the way students that leads to wealth, namely, one gives food, drink, clothing, vehicles, garlands, scents, ornaments, beds, dwelling, and lamps to ascetics or Brahmins.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So these are some more benefits of practicing generosity. Again, it's not anything mystical or magical. It's not the Buddha dangling a carrot trying to get you to do these things. He's just showing the cause and effect. Because as you eliminate your craving, desire, attachment, there's going to be significant benefits for you in this life. And should you actually need to be reborn, there's going to be benefits in the next life as well. And what the Buddha is describing here is a woman. I guess he's talking to a certain student, and they're probably discussing about a particular woman who doesn't actually get angry very easily. That means she has very little craving in her mind, right? If it doesn't take, if it takes a lot in order for a person to get angry, if they're pretty calm, they're pretty composed, that means they don't have very much anger in their mind. So if they don't have very much anger in their mind, that means it's because they have very little craving, desire, attachment. That's what's producing the anger. So by having practiced generosity, the craving, desire, attachment is very minimal. Therefore, there's very little discontentedness in the mind. And should that person not get to enlightenment, the Buddha is then describing what's actually going to produce for a future rebirth should this person need to be reborn. But always keep in mind the same things that lead to enlightenment, should you fall short of that, it leads to improved rebirth. So you would be very wise to practice these teachings because it's leading to an improved condition of your mind in your life in this existence. But it also, if you need to be reborn, would lead to an improved life in your next existence. But that's not the goal. The goal is to get to enlightenment in this life. So let me know what questions you guys have here. This is chapter 8.
David, I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah. So if a lady was born to the world in this life, that she's wealthy, she's beautiful, but in this life she stops practicing Buddhist teaching because she doesn't know about it. Will this lady be reborn to the human world for her next life? Maybe she might not be reborn to be have a wealthy family.
That's the potential.
Do you understand?
Yeah, that's the potential. I wouldn't be able to say just on the criteria that you're sharing right there exactly where somebody would be reborn. I would need to have met that person and understand their mind to be able to know where an individual is going to be reborn, if they're going to be reborn. But it's not as detailed and specific and exacting as what somebody could say, like all those criteria that you just said. You wouldn't be able to just say, okay, this person's going to be born in this particular place, because it's all about the condition of somebody's mind at the time of death. So if somebody's practicing the action and mental quality of generosity, that means the qualities of their mind is going to be very improved because they have very little craving, anger, and ignorance in their mind. So it's all about the condition of the mind more so than the actions. But it's the actions that are coming from the condition of the mind. But it's the condition of the mind that's really determining what is going to occur in a future next life.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. But just to follow up on that, if somebody was beautiful, rich, and wealthy and all that stuff in this life, and they weren't practicing generosity and they were reborn, that doesn't mean they're going to be rich, wealthy, and beautiful in their next life. They could easily be reborn into other realms, or if they come back into the human realm, they could very easily be reborn in a different situation. But just on the information that you provided, I wouldn't be able to say 100%.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So now we move to the next chapter, which is chapter 9.
The generous one will surpass the other. Here, Venerable Sir, there might be two disciples of the perfectly enlightened one equal in confidence, virtuous behavior, moral conduct, and wisdom, but one is generous while the other is not. With the breakup of the body after death, they would both be reborn in a good destination, in a heavenly world. When they have become heavenly beings, would there be any distinction or difference between them? There would be. Samana, the perfectly enlightened one said, the generous one, having become a heavenly being, would surpass the other in 5 ways: in heavenly lifespan, heavenly beauty, heavenly happiness, heavenly glory, and heavenly authority. The generous one, having become a heavenly being, would surpass the other in these 5 ways. But, Venerable Sir, if these two pass away from there and again become human beings, would there be some distinction or difference between them? There would be. Samana, the perfectly enlightened one, said, when they again become human beings, the generous one will surpass the other in 5 ways: in human lifespan, human beauty, human happiness, human fame, and human authority. When they again become human beings, the generous one will surpass the other in these 5 ways. But, Venerable Sir, if these two should go forth from the household life into homelessness, would there still be some distinction or difference between them? There would be. Samana, the perfectly enlightened one, said, the generous one, having gone forth, would surpass the other in 5 ways. 1. He would usually use a robe that has been specifically offered to him, seldom one that had not been specifically offered to him. 2. He would usually eat alms food that has been specifically offered to him, seldom alms food that had not been specifically offered to him. 3. He would usually use a lodging that had been specifically offered to him, seldom one that had not been specifically offered to him. 4. He would usually use medicines and supplies for the sick that had been specifically offered to him, seldom those that had not been specifically offered to him. 5. His fellow monastics, those with whom he resides, would usually behave toward him in agreeable ways by bodily, verbal, and mental action, seldom in disagreeable ways. They would usually present him what is agreeable, seldom what is disagreeable. The generous one, having gone forth, will surpass the other in these 5 ways. But, Venerable Sir, if both attain arahantship, would there still be some distinction or difference between them after they have attained arahantship? In this case, Samana, I declare, there would be no difference between the liberation of one and the liberation of the other. It's outstanding and amazing, Venerable Sir. Surely, one has good reason to give alms, a donation, and no meritorious deeds. since they will be helpful if one becomes a heavenly being, again becomes a human being, or goes forth. So it is, Samana. Truly, one has good reason to give alms, a donation, and do meritorious this, since they will be helpful if one becomes a heavenly being, again becomes a human being, or goes forth. This is what the perfectly enlightened one said. Having said this, the fortunate one, the teacher, further said this: as the stainless moon moving through the sphere of space outshines with its radiance all the stars in the world, so one accomplished in virtuous behavior, moral conduct, a person endowed with confidence, outshines by generosity all the selfish people in the world, as the 100-peaked rain cloud thundering, covered in lightning, pours down rain upon the earth, overwhelming the plains and lowlands. So the perfectly enlightened one's disciple, the wise one accomplished in vision, surpasses the selfish person in 5 specific respects: lifespan and glory, beauty and peacefulness. Possessed of wealth, after that he rejoices in heaven.
Thank you, Keely. So I'm not sure if you guys followed this entire discourse here as the Buddha was being asked these questions by one of his students, but essentially the student saying, okay, if there's a certain human being, all of these two human beings are both practicing the teachings of the Buddha, and they're equal in confidence, virtuous behavior, which is moral conduct, and wisdom. But one is generous and one is not. When they die and they're both reborn in heaven, would there be any difference or distinction between them? And the Buddha says, yes, there would be. And he gives the things that would be different. He talks about the heavenly lifespan, the beauty, happiness, glory, and authority. And then the student says, okay, well, what if they're reborn into the human realm? Would there be any difference? And the Buddha says, yes, human lifespan, beauty, happiness, fame, and authority. And then the student says, okay, well, what if they become ordained? That now that they were in the human realm, they went to the heavenly realm, they came back to the human realm, but now they both go ordained. Would there be any difference? And the Buddha says, yes, there's going to be these differences, that the one who was generous, there's going to be generosity that's practiced with them. They're going to have a robe, they're going to have alms food, they're going to have lodging, medicine, and supplies, and people are going to be very agreeable to them, meaning they're going to speak in warm and loving ways towards this person because they were generous in their previous life. And then finally the student says, okay, well, what if they both get to enlightenment? If they both attain arahantship, is there any difference? And the Buddha's like, no, there's no difference between them, because two enlightened beings, their mind is both liberated, right? They both would have had to practice generosity in order to get to enlightenment. So this person who was already generous in previous lives, they would have been continually generous in order to get to enlightenment. But this being who was not generous, in order to get to enlightenment, they would have needed to improve their generosity in order to get to enlightenment. So by the time they get to enlightenment, they're both practicing generosity, and their mind is both liberated, meaning they don't experience any discontentedness any longer. Having gotten to arahantship, both individual enlightened beings are going to have what's referred to as final knowledge. They're going to fully understand the path to enlightenment. But these beings are going to have different personality, different characters. They're going to have wisdom about other things. You could have an airplane pilot who is enlightened, who understands how to fly airplanes, or you could have a politician who's enlightened. The politician doesn't know how to fly airplanes, and the airplane pilot doesn't know how to be a politician, but both of them are functioning with a liberated mind, that they no longer experience any discontentedness whatsoever. So there's not going to be any difference in terms of their liberation of mind. They're both liberated. They're both having freedom of discontentedness, but there's going to be a difference in terms of their wisdom, their personality, their character, and things like this. But there wouldn't be any difference in their generosity. They would have both needed to practice a certain amount of generosity. So then eventually the student says, you know what? It's so amazing that this is the case, that it's very wise to practice generosity. That's what you come to, is you realize, wow, it's so wise to practice generosity. And then ultimately the Buddha gets to this teaching where he says, just like a stainless moon moving through the sphere of space, meaning the universe, outshines with its radiance all the stars in the world, so one accomplished in virtuous behavior and having confidence, meaning confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, the community, is outshined by generosity, because there's so many selfish people in the world. When somebody's practicing generosity, it's really noticeable that someone's practicing generosity. And that's what the Buddha is saying, and that now, having practiced generosity, there's these benefits that one will experience. And we've already been talking about some of these. Okay, so generosity here is so important to get to enlightenment, and so important in all the different lives. You might have been practicing a certain amount of generosity in your previous lives, and now here you are with an opportunity to learn about the teachings of the Buddha and maybe improve even further to get rid of any kind of selfishness that might be in the mind. Because just to even get to the first stage of enlightenment, you would need to practice a certain level of generosity. You need to be living open-handedly and joyful and giving and sharing. By the time you get to arahantship, there's no selfishness in the mind whatsoever. So let me know what questions you guys have here. This is chapter 9. The generous one would surpass the other. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. All right. So now we'll go to the last chapter for today, which is chapter 10. All right, Keely, you're up. You have to unmute. There you go.
If beings knew the result of giving and sharing, monks, if being knew, as I know, the result of giving and sharing, they would not eat without having given, nor would the stain of selfishness obsess them and take root in their minds. Even if it were their last bite, their last mouthful, they would not eat without having shared it, if there were someone to share it with. But because beings do not know, as I know, the result of giving and sharing, they eat without having given, and the stain of selfishness obsesses them and takes root in their minds. If beings knew what the perfectly enlightened one said, how the result of sharing has such great fruit, then, subduing the stain of selfishness with brightened awareness, they give in season to the noble ones, where a gift brings great fruit. Having given food as an offering to those worthy of offerings, many donors, when they pass away from here, the human state, go to heaven. They, having gone there to heaven, rejoice, enjoying sensual pleasures, unselfish. They take part in the result of sharing.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So this is a really important teaching to understand, because here's where the Buddha really helps you to see the importance of giving and sharing. What he's saying is, if beings know, as I know, the results of giving and sharing. What he's saying is the results of giving and sharing, if beings knew as I know, meaning he knows that giving and sharing leads to enlightenment. It leads to the peacefulness and the joy, all those different qualities that I talk about with enlightenment, the peace, calm, serenity, contentedness, and joy, the elimination of discontent feelings, the concentration, focus, clarity, deep memory, your personal and professional relationships are blossoming. You're not even in a bad mood anymore. You don't get exhausted and tired anymore. You'll get sleepy, but you won't be exhausted and tired. There's all these different benefits with getting to enlightenment. You're not carrying around these burdens of craving, desire, attachment anymore. If people knew the peacefulness and joy that the Buddha knew, or enlightened beings knew, and you knew that it was generosity that leads to that, what the Buddha is saying is they would not eat without having given, nor would the stain of selfishness obsess them and take root in their minds. Because if you knew how peaceful and joyful the mind is, and it's generosity that leads you to that, you wouldn't eat without having given. Even if it was the last bite, the last mouthful, they would not eat without having shared it, if there was someone to share with. Because giving and sharing is what leads to enlightenment, these results of the enlightened mind. That's the ultimate goal of practicing generosity. But you need to do that just understanding that it's enhancing the quality of your mind. But because beings do not know, as I know, meaning the Buddha, that the results of giving and sharing is that you get to this peaceful and joyful mind, this enlightened mental state, they eat without having given, and the stain of selfishness obsesses them and takes root in their minds. So that's what the Buddha is sharing here. If beings knew what the perfectly enlightened one said, how the results of sharing has such great fruit, then subduing the stain of selfishness with brightened awareness, that brightness, the radiance that shines through in the enlightened mind, getting all that pollution out of the mind, this brightness and radiance shines through the mind. They'd give in season to the noble ones, meaning the people who are practicing the teachings very closely, where a gift brings great fruit. Because when you're supporting people who are sharing the teachings, it's helping the teachings come into the world so that you and countless other people can learn the teachings. Having given food as an offering to those worthy ones of offerings, many donors, when they pass away from here, the human state, go to heaven. Again, that's not the ultimate goal, but the same things that lead to enlightenment, which is what the Buddha is teaching, leads to this rebirth in the heavenly world. They, having gone there to heaven, rejoice, enjoying sensual pleasures, unselfish, they take part in the result of sharing. Okay, so this really helps to tie it together for you. If beings knew the results of giving and sharing. So let me know if you guys have questions here. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So next week, we're going to be in the next 10 chapters. This is chapter 11 through chapters 20. You're welcome to read those ahead of time because you have the words of the Buddha, you have the reference, and you have reflections from me to be able to help you to integrate this into your life. That this entire book is going to teach you all about generosity, which is so utterly important for you to be able to develop and train your mind to eliminate craving, desire, attachment on the path to enlightenment and actually attain enlightenment. Tomorrow in the group learning program, which is Sunday morning, Thai time, 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. is when I'm going to be teaching that class, 2 different times and live streaming. I'm going to be teaching the Eightfold Path in its entirety from the beginning to the end. This is the path to enlightenment. So while generosity is important, this kind of plugs into this core central teaching of the Eightfold Path of the Buddha. And you would need to know that Eightfold Path inside and out, backwards and forwards, in order to be able to get to enlightenment. So I'm going to be teaching you that tomorrow in Sunday's class. And then on Wednesday, we're going to be doing the second part of a 4-part series where I'm teaching students Buddhist chanting. So you're welcome to attend these classes live, and where you can't attend them live, they're recorded. So you can listen to them and watch them on our YouTube channel, on Facebook, or on our podcast. So thank you all for your questions. Thank you, Keely, for reading the chapters. It's wonderful that you did that. I really appreciate that. Allowed me to focus on the teaching. And anytime you guys would like to learn, you're more than welcome to reach out in all the different methods. You can post in the Facebook group. You can ask questions in classes. You can send me a private message, or you can schedule personal guidance either in person here when I'm in Chiang Mai or traveling around the world, or you can schedule online as well, and I'll meet with you privately and talk to you about any questions that you might have and answer your questions and show you how to apply these teachings in your own personal life. So have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. Perhaps we'll see you in a future class. Be well. Sawadee krap. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.